So good evening and welcome back. With so much chaos, someone will do something stupid. And although they are prophetic words uttered in V for Vendetta, I think it is something that we're seeing now with anti-lockdown protests now leading into Sarah Everard protests. And you got to remember that it seems to be different sides. That one is saying, with the BLM protest, for example, get rid of the police, whereas the other side is saying, no, law and order is good, but then it's opposite sides to go with the BLM would be in support of masks and national lockdowns, and then the side that are against BLM would say, no, this is draconian and too much. So although they might be diametrically opposed, what have they got in common? They don't appreciate a police crackdown. And that is the most worrying thing, or the most accelerationist thing. Because what have the police done in order to retain the support that they have had from people that are against riots and violent protests? Basically nothing. They've tried to placate the left and have therefore lost their support amongst the right for freedom-loving individuals who would suggest that the role of the state is limited and is there to protect people, as in enforce laws and borders, to protect property rights, that kind of thing. But they've pissed that all away for the sake of diversity and inclusion. And in doing so, they've lost their base support, and instead have turned their base support against them. And on top of that, you've got BLM, who are communist and trying to destroy any capitalist society, right? You've then got anti-lockdown protests who want to be left alone and be able to be an individual. And now you've got the Sarah Everard protests, made all the worse, given that the key suspect is also a police officer. So now you've got three separate groups that ordinarily would have very little, if anything, in common. But because of how everything has unfolded, now the one thing that they do all have in common is that they are against the police as they currently are. So the question to ask yourself is, what support does the police currently have? As the new legislation proposed, which I covered a few days back, and the negativity that it will undoubtedly procure in the not too distant future, with expanding powers on being able to crack down on protests, what kind of response do you expect? The police have lost their support. So, no, I'm not going to support violent protests and the burning of police vehicles and the attack on private property, of course not, especially, or the injuring of police officers, hospitalising them, the like. No, I'm not going to condone that at all. But I will at least lend an ear in order to hear what the protesters have to say and why they feel compelled to do such a thing, as I always have done. And disturbingly, I think there's much more of a justification now than there was before, because, as I say, these three unconnected groups actually have a common cause. And what is the future if the police have lost support? If they've pissed away all the supporters that they might have had, well, then they have no standing. They are no longer governing by consent. And what is it that this so-called conservative government is trying to achieve by enacting greater police measures, anti-protest measures? Of course, they're going more for hate crimes and hate speech instead of trying to enact the law equally amongst everybody. They're not even trying to push that message of equality anymore. It is all about equity and therefore unequal treatment under the law, and that is the message that they're pushing. They've been taken over too much by the vocal minority, the radical fringes of the left, who will never be pleased all the time that they're not in power. And in doing so, they've lost track of what they were initially supposed to do from Peel's vision, of course, and what the vast majority of people would like them to do. So, it used to be, maybe there'd be a lot of sympathy and for the police and disgust for the protesters for causing this damage to police property. But that sympathy is waning very quickly. And there's far more understanding for protesters than there used to be. You could almost say it's the beginning of the end. I suppose the only semblance of hope that the powers to be have is that there is not one unified person or movement or idea that is trying to enact this revolution. You haven't got one key component that everybody has agreed upon. However, of course, they have simply agreed upon the police are not doing their job. And they're coming at this from different angles. But nonetheless, I'd say it's fair to say that only a minority of people think that the police are actually doing their job. Because, of course, the reasoning for that is you got the communists who are annoyed that private property exists. You've then got individualists, libertarians, right-wingers, whoever it might be, annoyed that the police are not protecting property rights and individual freedoms, but are instead cracking down on them. And then you got the people who would actually like that kind of thing, which are mainly women, as they vote for a larger social state and vote for a bigger government, by and large. But now, they're not best pleased with the police, given how Sarah Everard was allegedly murdered. So they've lost that support as well. And that is why all these individual groups have changed their mind. And of course, it's just a minority that are being violent, and it starts off peaceful and then gets worse. But that's always the case, and that is what you'd expect. And this has become a regular thing. And Priti Patel, as a photo from the BBC itself, of course, shows, with one of the plaques reading "pretty shitty," that there's no support now. She's overplayed her hand. What was it supposed to be about? Closing the borders, stopping illegal immigration, and yet immigration has still gone up under the Conservatives. Oh, Priti the Barbarian. Well, I think she's really let us down a few too many times now, and it's more like a paper tiger. So, the only hope is that this blows itself out before one unified message can be ascertained and spread amongst people. And I am aware that all national governments the world over are doing their best in order to stop that by manipulating social media and algorithms and search terms in order to ensure that you just see a narrow band of accepted thought and stopping you from being able to interact with real people, because otherwise you then might be able to have unpredictable conversations or non-engineered conversations, and that would be unacceptable. I do understand that. And although it might be a closing gap, the gap still exists. And let's bear in mind, as history has shown us so many times before, things can turn bad very quickly. And it is very quickly getting to the point of teetering on a knife edge. Without sounding too accelerationist or black-pilled, this is the case. We are currently an incredibly fractured society. There is very little that we all agree upon. With these protests happening, with some masked and some non-masked as well, that there are so many different reasons for this to happen. It seems like the only majority opinion of things that people can agree with is that there's something rotten in the state of the UK. And that is it. So there's no unifying message or things that everybody can get behind. There is simply a great dissatisfaction with how things are played out at the moment. And it is swiftly becoming a power vacuum for somebody to rise up from this and unite people. And that will not be a good day. So we will, of course, continue to do what we must in order to encourage speech and condemn violence. But if it gets to the point that speech becomes impossible, well, we all know what happens next. So I greatly implore you to ready yourself for that. Even if it's just getting provisions in case shit hits the fan and shops are closed and you wouldn't be able to get food otherwise. So make your own decisions, plan for the future, and do let me know what you guys think down below. Is this all overblown and, this is just part and parcel and it's getting more news coverage than normal? Or do you think, no, this murder could actually have been the something stupid that's been done, and it's all starting to unravel? Either way, let me know down below. Always intrigued to hear what you guys have to say. And as always, until next time, have a good one.